Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Instant Info Systems and XMedius webinar on Are You Using the Right Fax Solution? Today we're introducing XMediusFAX, an exciting player in the fax server and fax services game. It's day 2 of a 4-day webinar series. Today we're highlighting XMedius, Thursday, March 3rd. On March 8th, FaxCore will be joining us, and then on March 10th, EtherFax will be joining us to talk about fax services and specifically the transport portion of your fax server or fax service capabilities. I'm David Klein. I'm the CEO of Instant Info Systems, and joining me today are a bunch of people. Fernando Lopez is a sales engineer with Instant Info Systems. Carol Waldron, the Director of Strategic Channels at XMedius. Rich Bott, the Director of Pre-Sales Engineering at XMedius. And Con Tran, a Regional Sales Manager with XMedius. So we've got a great team with probably 100 years of experience in the fax server and fax services industry, and we hope we can answer all of your questions today. Speaking of questions, we will answer as many questions as we can while we're in the middle of the presentation, or at the end of the presentation, actually. And if you can submit your questions through the GoToWebinar control panel on the right side of your screen, we'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. And if we don't have enough time to get to all of the questions that are asked, we will reach out to you individually to get your questions answered directly. You guys are a great group that asks a lot of fantastic questions, so we are going to do our best. A little bit about Instant Info Systems. We do consider ourselves fax experts. We've been in this business for 23 years. We provide solution planning and design around cloud-based faxing, fax over IP, virtualization, consolidation, business integrations. We provide installation, migration, upgrade services, and we've got a staff that's got the technical capabilities that allow us to implement fax server and fax services technology into your specific environment, into Windows environments, integrating with SharePoint and SQL and Exchange and Active Directory and Notes and SAP and Oracle and Epic and many other types of capabilities. And that's really the key to a successful fax server and fax services implementation. So I'd like to turn the controls over to Carol Waldron, Director of Strategic Channels, to help us understand the greatness of XMedius. Carol?
Hey, thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. And good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Instant Info Systems and XMediusFAX webinar. Again, my name is Carol Waldron. I'm the Director of Strategic Channels here at XMedius. We also have a gentleman by the name of Rich Bott on the line with us today. Rich is our Director of Pre-Sales Engineering, and will be helping to field any questions you have throughout today's presentation, and again, of course, at the end. So we're very fortunate to have aligned ourselves with Instant Info Systems. Like us, they've been in business for roughly 20 years, focused almost exclusively on fax technology. You know, as times change, technology changes, and as such, we've signed a strategic agreement with Instant Info to collectively bring to market best-of-breed solutions. We're a leader in developing the technology. Instant Info Systems is a national leader in deploying, servicing, and supporting these solutions. So combined, our customers benefit from the expertise on both sides of the house. So today's agenda, we'll be covering a lot in a very little amount of time here. There we go. I'll introduce you to both XMedius, the company, as well as XMedius, the product. We'll discuss the 101s of the product, of course, but I want to take a deeper dive into some of our differentiators and more advanced features having to do with your telecom infrastructure, your HA, and your DR. So, in taking a look at who's on the call with us today, it's a mixed bag of folks. I recognize some names of attendees, folks with whom we've spoken in the past who are somewhat familiar with us, but it appears there are also quite a few for whom this is their very first exposure to us. So as not to leave anybody in the dust, I want to take a quick moment to explain who we are, what XMediusFAX is at a fundamental level, and most importantly, where our sweet spot is in the market. So, our company name today is XMedius Solutions, Inc. Our flagship product is called XMediusFAX. We were previously owned by a large European conglomerate named Sagemcom or Sagemcom, which I think some of you may be familiar with. Well, last year we were actually acquired. Our group broke away from the larger Sagem, and we're now majority owned by a U.S.-based private investment firm named Stone Caliber. When we were acquired, we were just rebranded ourselves as XMedius Solutions. So we're still under the same management, we still offer the same products, but now we have more autonomy and therefore the ability to react more quickly to market trends. We're the group in Stone's portfolio responsible for all fax-related technologies. We have an on-premise fax server that we'll be discussing today. We do have a cloud fax offering too. And of course, you can call Instant Info if interested in getting more info about that offering. So, truth be known, we've been in the U.S. market for close to 20 years with a variety of products under a variety of brand names. But it was in the 2003-ish time frame that we started recognizing a couple of significant trends in the market and decided at that time to readjust our product strategy accordingly. So that was right around the time that the voice over IP adoption rates were skyrocketing. And that was also when virtualization, VM, became prevalent in the market. And at that time, all of our fax solutions were like everyone else's. We required physical fax cards or boards or modems or ATAs. And given where the market was going, we decided those hardware dependencies were cumbersome. Our offerings, frankly, they just weren't elegant. So we went back to the drawing board, we totally rewrote our code from scratch, and in doing so, we wrote and bundled into our software our own T38 protocol stack. And herein lies a major differentiator, not just between us and WriteFax, but also between us and all the other fax products on the market. For those of you not familiar with the term T38, it's essentially the most reliable protocol used to run faxes over a VoIP network. Think of it as an insulation relayer that wraps itself around a fax packet and protects it from loss. What's unique about our product is that, again, we wrote our own T38 stack and included it in our software, meaning we don't have any third-party dependencies in order to fax enable your infrastructure. I suspect a lot of you are still using Brook Trout fax cards, or maybe you have a Cisco call manager with ATAs hanging off gateways, or maybe you're using Brook Trout's or Dialogic's SR140 software, which is essentially a T38 stack. We don't need any of that. We are a single source software-only fax solution. We got completely away from those dependencies, and we will continue to do so. We have a very one-throat-to-choke philosophy around here. We want to handle the R&D and support end-to-end, whether we're talking about the application itself or the mechanisms used to connect to your telephony. You know, as a customer, the last thing you want to hear is that we need to put you on hold to call a third-party vendor or Dialogic to troubleshoot. That's when the finger pointing ensues. Or you install a Windows update, and lo and behold, your electronic dock transports, your EDCs, or your fax cards are no longer working. We have control end-to-end of our product, and as such, our customer satisfaction rates are in the neighborhood of the 99% range. Call us control freaks. So here's what a typical XMediusFAX deployment looks like. The box to the left is representative of your PBX, your switch. The box further to the right is representative of XMediusFAX. Now true, you can drop XMedius on a physical server, but remember, because we're software only, you also have the option of virtualizing the product. VM, Hyper-V, Citrix, whatever you choose. And frankly, that's the route we typically recommend going. It's silly not to leverage the features in those products. So in the end, you can load our software on the network wherever you choose, and we simply point ourselves to your phone system via IP. In doing so, we can leverage your infrastructure end-to-end. We can use your switch, your PBX, for call control, routing capabilities. We can leverage an unlimited number of gateways or peers. In the end, we just piggyback the infrastructure you've already built, the infrastructure in which you've already invested. So fax calls therefore respond just like voice calls. Moving over to the far right are the delivery and sending options we offer. XMedius, of course, gives users the option of receiving faxes via email. Very common. We also have a thin client, a browser-based client called our web client. We can certainly route faxes to that. We can route faxes, too, to specified network printers, multifunction printers, which is becoming an increasingly large part of our business. And, of course, likewise, we can route faxes to network directories, folders, back-end applications, and, important to note, finger in the air here, any combination thereof simultaneously without creating forwarding rules. There are some fax products on the market that require that you manually create forwarding rules in order to route to multiple destinations, and that's not the case with us. So we can basically route faxes anywhere to which we have network access. And, of course, the same applies in reverse. Users can send from all these different applications, and two, because XMediusFAX emulates a printer, users can send documents from any application from which they can print. Outbound faxes are therefore simply directed back to XMedius. We call out through your gateways, your switch, your telephony, and the fax call goes out over your existing lines. It's that simple. Now, I should throw in a side note here that this, what you're viewing here, is the most common topology that we see. It isn't, however, the only option. So, as an example, if you want to bypass your switch altogether, we can do that. Maybe you want to terminate a SIP trunk right at our MAC address. We can do that. Or maybe you want to, for whatever reason, still use your Brook Trout fax boards. Bypass the switch, bring a PRI straight into a board. We can do that too. You know, our sweet spot in the market is certainly our T38 stack, but we also support G711 and G711 fallback in those rare cases where T38 isn't supported. So frankly, the telecom possibilities for integration are endless. But again, this is just the most common scenario that we see. As long as we're having a conversation about telecom, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that one of the tightest strategic relations we have in the market today is, in fact, with Cisco. And again, looking at our attendees today, I think this might encompass 60, 70% of you. I know a lot of you are using Cisco Voice over IP. So many moons ago, Cisco had a relationship with a different fax vendor. It was WriteFax. They had an OEM agreement and private labeled WriteFax under the name of Cisco Fax, but it was around the 2011 timeframe that Cisco ceased relations with WriteFax because of failure rates. They frankly felt that the product reflected poorly on them, and it was at that time they ceased any OEM relations and started endorsing us as their go-to fax over IP product. We are a Cisco Gold Development Partner. Again, if I had to fair guess, I'd say probably 80+% of our customers run our software in tandem with either a call manager or a BE6 or 7000 platform. We were the first to develop a product, in fact, that sits on a Cisco blade. Our relationship with Cisco is so significant, and it's such a significant representation of our customer base that it's a development arena we take very, very seriously. We are constantly in the labs, both ours and Cisco's, to perform interop testing and co-development efforts. So again, those of you out there using Cisco, reach out to Instant Info Systems to discuss all the different options. So these days, it's hard to have a telecom conversation without bringing mobility also into the conversation. I'm happy to report that in our most current release, version 8.0, we're offering an app designed specifically for Apple iPads and iPhones. It's a free download you can get from the App Store that extends faxing capabilities to your remote users who have those devices. The app offers all the functionality that you would certainly expect when you're sending or receiving faxes. Receiving is very straightforward. There are a variety of ways with which you can do it. You can choose your fax recipients when sending a fax from your device, from fax phone books, from your favorites, And then over on the right, you can see you can personalize a fax cover page. You can add comments, you can add a subject line, etc., etc. It's very user intuitive. From there, you can of course add attachments, docs stored in iCloud, Dropbox, Google, any file management app available on your device. And lastly, you can choose some finishing options. How many times you want to retry sending in the event of a failure, and with what priority, with what resolution, and send the document that way. You know, increasingly, we're seeing Apple emerge in the enterprise space, so in response to customer demand, we developed these tools. Now, moving into some of the user desktop experiences versus the application or the mobile application. I mentioned that XMediusFAX emulates a printer. Any application from which you can print, you can also send a fax. This here, what you're looking at, is our SendFax client. It's an outbound-only application, and I should mention it's one of the very few instances in which we require a client install. It's just an MSI file that you can push out silently. It's basically adding an XMediusFAX printer. For a user to send a fax, all they need to do is select File, Print, XMediusFAX, and this template will launch. You'll see near the upper left that it's very user intuitive. Users can manually address a fax. They can also select recipients from fax phone books or any ODBC, MAPI, or LDAP phone book source. Users will get a real-time graphical image of the fax in the larger window, and of course to the left, users can also see thumbnail images of the document. These images are drag and droppable, resortable, and again, this is an outbound-only option for sending. More commonly, our customers want to integrate fax capabilities into their email package. Here, you'll see sending a fax from within Outlook. Users can select recipients from existing phone books, or they can simply type a fax number at faxdomain.com, enter a subject line, cover sheet notes in the body of the message, and add attachments. It's very simple. Same goes for sending a fax. Or excuse me, same goes for receiving faxes in the email. Users can receive their faxes as PDF or TIFF attachments, or if you don't want attachments stored on the mail server, we can instead just send a notification to a user with a hyperlink, which when you click it, it's just a pointer back to the image stored on the fax server. So here too, very simple. And I should mention that although here I'm showing an example of the Exchange or Outlook integration, we also support, of course, O365, Lotus Notes, and any SMTP POP3 mail package. We have a thin client, browser-based client, our web client as well. Again, this can also be used for sending and receiving. Here, you'll see a user interface for sending a fax. To the left, you'll see folders in which users can manage their inbound and outbound histories. They can also view their real-time queue. If they want to view an all-inclusive list, they can do that also. Addressing a fax is, here too, very straightforward. Users can address it manually or by accessing phone books. Insert a cover page, subject line, attachments, send. On the inbound side, users can easily access their faxes, view them, forward them, etc. All these columns you see here are searchable and sortable, and there are some advanced features as well. Granting delegate access to other users on the network, you can add notes, etc. Again, this is just a very user-friendly, thin client experience. So let's hop over to the administrative side of things for a minute. Around the time we were developing our T38 stack, we were approached by a very large service provider who wanted us to design a product for them that offered multi-tenancy, and we did. A lot of the advanced admin features you'll see in our product today, in fact, are an outgrowth of that engagement. Our database structure is such that we support multi-tenancy. You can essentially partition the fax server and designate what we call sites. Sites are just logical groupings of users, similar to what maybe a write fax would call work groups. But with these secure sites, you can designate site-specific administrators, people who have authority to maybe add users or cover pages. They can assign user permissions and restrictions. You can create site-based profiles for users. So from an admin standpoint, it's very, very simple to maintain. And I should note, of course, we can do things like real-time LDAP lookups to something like an AD if you choose. It's an enterprise-class administrative interface. It's hard to have a conversation about administering a fax server without also having the conversation about uptimes, high availability, and DR. So what you see here on the screen is a very common scenario we run into with other fax servers on the market, like maybe a WriteFax. The two blue boxes in the center are representative of two fax servers. I'll call them fax server 1 and fax server 2. You'll notice I've drawn a dotted line connecting the two. It's dotted because the databases of those two servers don't talk. They simply can't replicate in real time. Instead, manufacturers like WriteFax recommend, 1, you install a module on the fax servers called the Shared Services Module. 2, you offload your fax images to a SAN or a NAS. 3, you offload your database records, your metadata, the historical data about those faxes to an external SQL server, which most commonly is clustered to another SQL server. And 4, more often than not, they recommend that you offload your fax boards or your SR-140 drivers, what they call remote dock transports or electronic dock transports, to yet again additional peripheral servers. All this leads to the question of why. It's lunacy in this day and age to require conservatively 5 peripheral servers to support a fax application. It's costly. There are so many potential points of failure that it's counterintuitive to even call it HA at all. And this is a conservative example. We've run into customers who've approached us who have 10+ fax servers deployed nationwide, each of which also have their own shared services modules, their own dedicated channels, remote dock transports. It's what we call WriteFax gone viral. The solution. In an XMediusFAX universe, this is what an HA deployment looks like. There's fax server 1, fax server 2, period. You'll notice that the dotted line here has been replaced with a solid line connecting the two, and that's because our databases have the ability to replicate in real time. We don't require SQL or a NAS. In our HA, the channels are shared. They can float between the two servers. The services are shared. We can load balance, etc., etc. They're real-time twins, essentially. In the event of a failure of any kind on one of the two servers, the fully functioning server will pick up the workload until the malfunctioning server is fully restored. Period. It's our 4 nines uptime solution. It's a consolidated topology versus what other manufacturers offer, and frankly, it's enterprise class. We can, of course, take it a step further if you choose, and we can add a layer of DR. Let's say a company has offices in Los Angeles and Phoenix. What you see here are a pair of HA servers operating in tandem in LA. And maybe they want to do a lazy backup, a lazy DR to Phoenix in the event of a catastrophe, God forbid an earthquake in LA. We can do that. We just create rules so that the HA servers are fully functioning together in LA, and with X frequency, they back up to the remote DR server. Likewise, we sometimes see applications that are so mission critical or because of company mandates. Companies operate 2 pairs of HA servers in a couple of different locations. The possibilities are frankly endless, and that's what our enterprise class customers demanded, rightfully so. And so in response, that's what we developed and deployed. Case in point, one of our larger customers is a group out of Phoenix by the name of Tri-West Healthcare Alliance. For those of you not familiar with them, this is a private firm that handles all the veterans' discharge benefits. So when folks leave the military, it's all their discharge papers, their insurance, their benefits, their claims, their so on and so forth. You know, many moons ago, they approached us about consolidating their fax server technology into a fewer number of servers, and they felt certainly that we were the most secure, flexible, and reliable on the market, and decided to make the switch over to us. And here, a larger sampling of some of our national customers who use XMediusFAX. The vast majority of which, 60 to 70% of them, came to us after their experience with a less efficient fax server product and topology. Again, just a quick sampling of some of the customers nationwide that use us. So, in summary, XMediusFAX is clearly the global leading fax over IP pioneer since 2002-2003. Again, a lot of it having to do with the fact that we wrote and bundled into the product our own protocols in order to interoperate in these larger, more complex voice over IP environments today. Certainly we offer ease of implementation, it's user-friendly, and again, one of our sweet spots in the market certainly is our HA and DR story. Nobody else in the market today has the same offering, and we're very, very proud. So, we're fortunate, as I said, to be partnering with best-of-breed partner Instant Info Systems here today. We can't thank them enough for hosting this for us, and I think at this time it's probably appropriate to open the lines, open the chat, and have a larger conversation and address some of your technical questions that may have arisen throughout the presentation. So on that note, I want to throw it over to, let me think, Dave, maybe you want to take on moderator role. If you have any questions, again, there's a chat panel available on the right-hand side of your screen, I believe. We'll answer as many questions as humanly possible. I'm watching the questions roll in, and it sounds like we've certainly opened the conversation here. So, Dave, I'll toss it over to you. I'm not sure where you want to start.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you for a great presentation. As always, you do a great job and really have shown the great capabilities that XMedius has, and we're very excited to be partnering with you. We have a whole bunch of questions here, and let's just jump right into them. Can you tell us a little bit more about XMedius Cloud? We want to get rid of on-premise completely. Can we do that with XMedius?
Yeah, why don't I take that one, Dave? The answer is, of course, absolutely. Increasingly, the cloud business is becoming more and more significant for us and for Instant Info Systems. What we've shown you here today is essentially the offering we have in the cloud. Again, going back to our inception and the notion that XMediusFAX was developed for a very large service provider, a few years ago, as we started watching the industry head that direction, we said, hey, well, this is silly. Let's put our product in the cloud and offer it as a service. So what you've seen here today is available in the cloud as well. It's available on a subscription basis, a monthly basis, or you can essentially buy prepaid bundles of credits and use it that way.
Got it. Got it. Okay. If you don't set up routing rules, how does the software know where to send the fax?
If you don't set up routing rules, but you're going to set up routing rules. I'm going to toss that one over to Rich Bott, our Director of Pre-Sales Engineering, so that maybe he can elaborate a little on the options available with regards to routing.
Sure, I'll be glad to handle that one. It's a great question because technically speaking, you don't have to set up routing rules. What you have to do is set up routing hints. And what a routing hint is really just a direction as to how we want to route a particular fax, whether you want to send it to email or whether you want to send it to a network printer or something like that. And then we can use an Active Directory integration, for example, to grab the information on the fly for those individual fax numbers. So, for example, if you have a phone number that is supposed to be 1234 as the last 4 digits, and that 1234 belongs to Carol, we do a real-time lookup in Active Directory to see the fax number 1234 and to look at Carol's email address, which is associated with that, and then we automatically create an email and send it to that particular user mailbox. So therefore, you don't really have to create the delivery rule. All you have to do is create a hint, and we do real-time lookup to deliver those faxes to the destination that we find.
Got it. Got it. Very interesting. Here's a very topical question. We're currently running WriteFax. What's my cost impact from a channel perspective?
Cost impact from a channel perspective. My comment back to that is really twofold. Number one, like WriteFax, we license our software per channel. Each individual XMediusFAX server can support up to 800-900 channels. And then I would suggest reaching out to Instant Info Systems for a larger conversation about your needs, requirements, so we can size a solution properly for you and get you appropriate pricing.
Sure, sure. And I mean, the beauty of XMedius is that the channel and the T.38 stack are bundled together. Isn't that correct, Carol?
Absolutely right. You bet. Unlike in, let's say, a WriteFax universe where you purchase the channels from WriteFax and then you have additional costs for the SR140, I think they call it a FOIP channel. Ours are consolidated and for a lesser amount.
Right. They call that a FOIP-U. Here's another question about WriteFax. Is there a migration path from WriteFax to XMedius?
Probably the most common question we get. My answer to that is here too, twofold. Number one, you of course have the option of maintaining your WriteFax server and its database as an independent static entity post XMediusFAX launch, meaning you can maintain your WriteFax records over here on server A. Our R&D team is currently taking a look under the hood to write a migration tool from one to the other. There are some weird proprietary pieces to the WriteFax database that go back to their inception when they were first developed and written in a RAMA format, I believe, that are causing, a couple of questions for us. Can we protect the integrity of the data when going from one to the other? It's all under review, and we expect within the next week we're going to have a final determination back from R&D as to what we can, and just as importantly, what we can't do if you want to migrate the data from one to the other.
Right. So the RAMA database that WriteFax uses is in the older versions of WriteFax, and now they've moved to a Windows-based SQL environment, which may or may not make it a little bit easier for you. And speaking of SQL, you mentioned you don't need SQL. What do you use as your database?
You bet. So you're right, Dave. With the more current versions of WriteFax, I understand that they have moved exclusively to a SQL database, which is why we, moving forward as an R&D group, are taking a closer look as to how we can migrate data from one to the other. Our product was written on MySQL. It's included in the software, does a beautiful job. Because we're MySQL, it therefore gives us the ability, for instance, to export our database to a SQL server if you wanted to. There's really no reason to. But again, because we can offload to SQL, that leaves us, of course, with the impression that we can therefore integrate and migrate a WriteFax database to us. So again, it's all under consideration in R&D, and we think within the week we'll probably have a final determination as to where we go from here.
So your implementation does not have to worry about what the latest version of SQL from Microsoft is, or the latest version of Exchange or of Windows Server. You can run in a self-contained environment.
Yes.
Well, we do have restrictions on the version of Windows operating system, and we support all of those Windows operating systems that Microsoft is currently supporting. So we require that Windows infrastructure as an installation base, but we're not tied to a version.
Sure, sure. Thank you for making that clarification. How about support for email systems, Exchange, Notes, SMTP? Is that all part of the XMediusFAX environment?
Certainly is. We support all of the above, and increasingly we're getting requests from our enterprise customers to support, of course, O365, which we do.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Is there a limit to the number of fax ports in an XMediusFAX environment?
I'm going to defer to Rich on that, because in theory, no. We say it's 1,000+ channels. The bigger question is best practices. So Rich, in your experience, where do you think we quote-unquote max out?
Yeah, so the difference there is we really don't have a maximum number of channels. We have a restriction of what we call 300 active channels on a single OS instance, meaning that one server itself will max out at about 300 channels, but we can chain some of these servers together to increase the size of the actual system itself. So one active XMediusFAX server spread across with drivers on multiple OSs could technically handle thousands of channels. So it's 300 on a single box. So if you're looking for a single box solution or a single instance of VMware type of scenario, it would be 300 channels. but we can multiply that by just adding additional licenses, whether it's additional VMs, OS instances, or physical servers if you need them.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay, so you mentioned virtualization. Another question came in about virtualization. Can you run XMediusFAX in a Hyper-V environment?
Yes.
That was a yes?
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
fantastic. A couple of more detailed questions. Where are the faxes stored and how long can they be stored for?
That's a great question. I'll go ahead and handle that one, Carol. The faxes themselves are stored as image files on the fax server. They can be encrypted using the NT encryption on the OS, so that if that's need be for things like HIPAA requirements or Sarbanes-Oxley, etc., PCI compliance. The images themselves, we have what we call an aging process. It's a deletion rule. It's a policy that we put on that allows you to determine how long you're going to keep those faxes on the database. So we support being able to offload those to any archive system. So if you're using a document management system, we can have those immediately moved into your doc management, including all of the metadata around that delivery information. But on the server itself, you supply these rules around inbound, outbound, as to how long you want to keep them. And they are on a site-by-site basis. So technically speaking, if your HR department wants to keep all their faxes for 7 years, you can put a 7-year expire time on those faxes. And for the rest of the company, you might put a 1 year. So it's available to, create your rules based upon the organization and how you're operating and what your needs are for each department or each group of users.
Sure, sure. That makes a lot of sense. And so you've got that functionality and the granularity that you're looking for. Question about your T38 stack. Does your T38 implementation overcome some of the dialogic functional limits?
Oof. Without knowing what specific functional limits we're talking about, it's hard to comment on that. I think it's important to have a conversation here about T38 in general. Truth be known, there are two kinds of T38. There's T38 pass-through and T38 relay. In order to successfully run faxes bidirectionally in a VoIP environment via a fax server, you want to make sure that you have T38 relay. And that's an important question to ask, whether you're talking about a manufacturer like Dialogic who supports, the SR140, the T38 that way, or maybe you're looking at SIP or a SIP carrier. Do they support T38 relay versus just pass-through? Our success rates are incredibly high, and Rich, maybe you can comment on the nuts and bolts of our T38 stack versus something like an SR140. But again, we are incredibly successful with our T38 stack.
Well, there's the T38 is a very standard protocol that was written, and we adhere to the T38 standards that are out there. The biggest issue that we come in contact with T38 implementations is more of environments supporting it end-to-end as opposed to just supporting it. You've heard a lot of companies will come back and say, well, fax over IP is not as stable as we need it. And that statement is just simply not true. It may not be stable in the environment that they're trying to run it because their carrier, for whatever reason, doesn't support it end-to-end or something along those natures. Hence the reason that we did add our G711 capabilities and our fallback pass-through capabilities there. But T38 is a very solid protocol. It handles pretty much anything that the T38 spec or the T30 spec, which is the traditional voice-handled protocol for fax. So we really don't see any issues as far as being able to replace like an SR140 with our particular stack. There's no limitations that I know of that you're going to come across in that type of environment.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Rich. Here's an interesting question. Obviously, every situation is different, but assuming the necessary network bandwidth is present, is HA across physical locations possible?
Yeah, it is. So we have a couple of requirements, and typically in the past we've said that in order to do HA, the two fax servers need to be deployed on the same LAN segment with a 10 millisecond or less delay over the network. That said, a big chunk of our customers using HA do in fact do HA across the WAN. Again, the provision there is that you've got a 10 millisecond or less connection via the network.
Okay, 10 megabits per second is your requirement then?
Correct.
Wonderful. Okay. Here's a couple of pretty straightforward questions. What's the base OS? Windows, Linux, Solaris?
Windows.
Windows. We need a Windows server out there.
Yeah, we support all of the latest Windows versions of OS systems that Microsoft is currently supporting.
Got it. Got it. And is email to fax supported?
You bet.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Got it. Can you support Office 365 remote hosting? I'm assuming they're talking about Exchange in the Office 365 environment.
Yeah, it sounds like it. You bet. Absolutely. And again, increasingly from our enterprise class customer base, we're seeing the emergence of O365. So the answer to that is yes, we absolutely support it.
Okay. Can admins control the outgoing queue?
There are a lot of different ways to answer that question. Rich, I'm going to toss it to you. I've got my...
Well, the simple answer is yes, admins can control the outbound queue. You do have the ability to go in and pause a fax or cancel a fax on behalf if you're noticing that there are issues or something that comes up, there is the ability to go in and handle that queue. So the answer there is yes.
So if somebody has submitted we'll call it a fax blast, 100 or 1,000 faxes simultaneously for whatever reason, and somebody comes to the admin and says, hey, I need to get this out right now, it's important. Can you move that to the top of the queue or give it a higher priority than the other faxes that are already in queue ahead of it?
So the answer is yes, we do support priority faxing. So we do have high, normal, and low priority faxing. So it is very easy to just resend the fax with a higher priority and jump to the top. And as an administrator, you have the ability to restrict who has what permissions. So, I know a lot of companies that will refuse to give their marketing department high priority just in case they're sending blast faxes out or anything like that, that it never goes out above a normal priority. So that allows your payroll services and human resources to have that capability to kind of trump any of the marketing jobs that are going through that system. So it's really on how you want to design it, but as an administrator, you can decide who has those permissions, and then you can assign those permissions on a fax by fax or a group of fax basis.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Okay. Great answer. Great answer. You mentioned integration with MSPs. I think you were talking about, multifunction devices. Do you support Xerox machines?
You bet. We absolutely do. In fact, of the MFP vendors out there today, Xerox is probably the most strategic alignment we have. Here too, much like our Cisco integration, we are constantly in their labs and they in ours to jointly develop products that are going to complement the multifunction printers they offer today. We have what we call an EIP module available, which will extend faxing to the interface on the devices themselves. The nice thing is that we do things like user authentication. If a user has a 4-digit PIN before they can perform a function at that device, we can adhere to that. If they have swipe cards, we can adhere to that too. We can access phone books from those devices. We have follow me printing. So for instance, if a user needs to receive a fax but they don't know in what part of the building they're going to be, they need to receive the fax, they can authenticate at the device, grab the fax, and download it from their physical presence. They can manipulate cover sheets, so on and so on and so forth. Inbound faxes, like I said, are very straightforward, same with outbound. Two, I should mention that we recently launched and developed a Connect Key app. It's an application that's free for download from Xerox's equivalent of the App Store. You go out to the site, you download it, and you can fax enable the device on the fly by downloading this module from their cloud. Really interesting stuff.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, Rich, Carol, thank you so much for joining us today. You've been a wealth of information, a great presentation, very detailed answers to the questions that were asked. Thank you to everybody who's joined us today for absorbing the information and asking such thoughtful questions. We look forward to working with all of you to help you in determining what the right fax solution is for your current environment. And at this point, I'd like to conclude by saying thank you once again to our friends at XMedius, Carol, Rich, Con. Thank you so much. This concludes today's presentation of Is Your Fax Solution Right for You with Instant Info Systems and XMedius. Have a great day, and we look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great day.